Yes, I am doing this. While there are points in the story of the Earth that are beyond absurd, and at the moment I think the author has either completely lost the plot or is gearing up for an impressive plot twist, I think we need to look back at the history of this story and at what I think is one of its best bits of world building, and that is ancient Egypt. Egypt is an example of what I call geographical world building, where the story is built around the land the characters live on. I think this is the rarest form of world building, as most stories tend to build their worlds around either their characters or the plot. And because this is so rare, I want to talk about it. When you look at ancient Egypt, one thing that may strike you is how the writer takes full advantage of every aspect of the story in crafting the kingdom. One of the most important aspects, and one of the most obvious, is the River Nile, a calm river that flooded with such regularity it practically acted as a calendar. Yes, I know it's unrealistic, but some stories deserve a pass on that. The river Nile facilitated irrigation and allowed the country to thrive agriculturally. However, there are two other aspects in the world that facilitate this that I honestly find more interesting on this point: the Mediterranean and the desert, but mostly the desert. Because the river Nile flows north, but the Mediterranean Sea blows a wind from the north to the south, this made travel through the river incredibly easy. You could either go with the current up north or let the wind blow you south. And the easy travel helped with my second point. Most fictional stories where the kingdom is built surrounded by a desert usually portray the desert as a sort of adversary to the development of the kingdom. But once again, the world building is on point, taking perfect advantage of everything at the writer's disposal. While one of the things that is most striking about the Egyptian landscape is the sight of a kingdom finally appearing in the vast desert, the desert is probably the reason why the kingdom lasted so long in the first place. Beyond being a natural barrier for invaders, until it wasn't, it meant that ancient Egypt couldn't really grow beyond the Nile. It could grow up and down the river, but it could never leave the safety of its most important geographical landmark. And with that landmark acting as a mode of transportation, it made the Kingdom of Egypt very stable, not just in comparison to African kingdoms, but also to kingdoms almost anywhere else. One thing that's obvious in studying the rise and fall of ancient kingdoms in history is that they usually start to fall when they get too big to be managed by their central ruling power. But because Egypt essentially existed on a line that was easily traversable, it made the pharaoh's job of controlling the entire country quite easy because people couldn't just go out of his reach. And I know that this completely unique river that flows in the opposite direction of most other rivers, facilitating the growth of a kingdom in such a way, is unrealistic. But the story of the earth has been weirder. I'm looking at you, Australia, and you're losing a war to flightless birds. The thing about world building using geography is that it's one of the few bases of world building that is actively recognized by the people in the story. A story built around a person or theme is basically unknown to the world, but when it's obvious that your kingdom's central river is the only reason you still have a kingdom, that river tends to gain a little bit more of significance. And the Egyptians really had a high opinion of rivers, so much so that they believed Egypt actually had two major rivers, the Nile and the one Ra, the sun god, rode his boat on, looping into the sky as the sun in the day and into the underworld at night. However, one example where I think Egyptian myths really reflect their environment is in how they see chaos, or Isfit. I totally butchered that name. A vast embodiment of destruction that exists as a counterpoint to Maat, or order. That's another name I totally butchered. This creation, or rather destruction myth, makes a lot of sense when you realize that the Egyptians would have been terrified of the prospect of their civilization being swallowed up by the vast desert around them. Their interpretation of the desert was so tied to chaos that the god of deserts, Set, is sometimes identified as a god of chaos and evil, despite not really being on the side of Apophis, the serpentine manifestation of chaos. The way Egypt as a society was built around its environment is one of the most realistic methods of world building, as it takes people involved in the creation of its world and their reactions to their environment into account. From their religion to the very foundation of their country, everything comes down to meticulous use of the natural landmarks placed around them to their fullest extent, creating a very unique kingdom in the world. Don't forget to like the video if you enjoyed it, leave a comment on your thoughts and subscribe for more. And for more world building content, look at this video on how I evolved a single concept into a society.